Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing really well. So I just watched The Umbrella Academy on Netflix. Let's talk about it. So The Umbrella Academy is based on a comic book series created by Gerard Way, and it's all about these 7 young children who were all born on the same day to mothers who hadn't been previously pregnant, and they all have special gifts and special powers. They get adopted by this eccentric billionaire who wants to create an Umbrella Academy to save the world somehow. I saw the promos for this TV series, but I didn't really think much of it. I thought it was very X-Men like, you know, Professor Xavier's School for Gifted Children or whatever. That's the kind of vibe that I got from this series, just based on the promos themselves. But I have to say, after dedicating 10 hours of my life on this show, I am so excited about this. I can't wait to get into every single element of this show. I think it's going to be a pretty long video. But in terms of how I'm going to structure my very first TV show review, I think I'm going to go through the characters first and then talk about some other elements of the TV show that's worth discussing. If you guys enjoyed today's video and you like talking about TV shows and movies, please be sure to subscribe to my channel to catch more videos on that. First off, I'm going to go through the characters like I said, and this will be a spoiler review, so it's going to contain some spoilers. If you don't want to know anything about this show going in, please do not watch this. In terms of the characters, I have some favorites and I have some characters that I like less, and my favorite character in the whole show is Klaus. I absolutely love Robert Sheehan. I loved him in Misfits and I was so excited to see him here, and he does an excellent job with this character. Klaus is a very larger than life character. He's very vibrant and full of energy, but inside he harbors darkness and he's battling with such crazy demons, literally demons, because he's able to communicate with the dead. And I think that it's such a complex character to be dealing with something that is so dark on the inside, but on the outside he comes across as cheery, if a little bit disturbed. I would say that the way he was played is just absolutely perfect. I think that balance between having someone who is so self-destructive and it's so tragic and filled with pathos, but at the same time he's so likable and so charming that you kind of see the type of character he could have become had it not been for this curse that he's burdened with. So I love the character of Klaus. Definitely more complex than some of the other siblings that there are on the show, but I definitely think that he also works really well in combination with other siblings. So for example, he always sees Ben, who is the dead brother, and he's able to see him and communicate with him because his power is to see the dead. And they work so well together because you just have Ben being his conscience, almost like telling him when he's slipping off the rails or trying to keep him in line and just taking care of his brother even beyond the grave. And I absolutely love that relationship they have together. Ben is essentially able to live on through Klaus because of his connection with his brother, and even at the end it's hinted at that perhaps Klaus could even bring Ben to the same plane of existence that they're all in, or perhaps even bring him back to life. So I really enjoyed that character. I enjoyed that combination of the two siblings, and even when he's again talking to his other siblings, which this show does a really good job of kind of pairing off the siblings with one another to see how the dynamics would work in that sense. And I really enjoyed him in every single pairing that he was in. So he's definitely my favorite. And on top of having some of the funniest scenes in the show, he also has some of the saddest, like in episode 6, The Day That Wasn't, where we explore how he went back in time to the Vietnam War and fell in love with this soldier called Dave. And you just see that sadness in him when he loses Dave and he loses this person that he loved. And he's unable to communicate with him because he's always so drunk and always so high. These toxins negatively affect his powers and make him unable to communicate with the dead even when he wants to. He's just filled with such pathos, and that's really emphasized when he's even trying to get sober, and yet his siblings still aren't taking him seriously because they're just used to Klaus being Klaus. So So he was definitely a favorite character. And then next up we have Alicent and Luther. Now for me personally, those characters individually aren't that compelling, but together they do make for a very compelling love story. So first off with Luther, you have this really tragic story where Mr. Hargreaves sent him off to the moon just as a distraction tactic, and also because he felt really guilty about what he did to his son, turning him into a half ape man. So that's really sad to see Luther kind of lose his sense of purpose in the show, something that he had stuck to for so long, because he was the only one of the Umbrella Academy to actually stay behind with his father, and he actually fully bought into the whole saving the world mission. So it was so tragic to see him lose that sense of self and sense of purpose. And when he acted out and started going partying and taking drugs and everything, just to kind of catch up on all of the life events that he had missed out on, just being stuck on the moon and also stuck in that mansion, it was really nice to see Klaus again just coming in and advising him not to go down that path, because of all of the siblings, he is very familiar with how that ends. So I really enjoyed that aspect of Luther's character, because at the beginning it was a bit frustrating seeing him kind of stick so staunchly to the ideology that their father had kind of fed them. But by the end of it, you see a much more complex character come on the other side, where he started to think a bit more critically about what he is told. When it comes to Alicent, I'm a bit more conflicted, because whilst I found her story to be the least compelling on its own, her love story with Luther actually makes her a bit more interesting. But just looking at her on her own, she has this power where she can say, I heard a rumor, and get anyone to do whatever she wants, and as a result, she's ended up with everything that she could have ever wanted. She has a successful career as an actress. She was married, she has a daughter, but eventually the consequences of her power started catching up to her, and she started to rely on it so much so that she couldn't handle not getting what she wants, even from her daughter. So in the episode, I heard a rumor, she basically is telling her daughter to go to sleep, and then her daughter's like, no, like, I want you to read the story one more time, or tell me the story about Space Boy one more time. And she refuses, and she says, you know, I heard a rumor that you are really, really tired, to the daughter, to get her to sleep, essentially mind controlling her to do her bidding. And it was just so disturbing that to me, it didn't make me very sympathetic towards the character of Alicent, because it was something so small, and on one hand it does show how toxic that power has become, because she's essentially relying on it for everything. But on the other hand, it was like you could have just said no to the girl, you could have just been stricter with her or firmer with her. Like, it's, of all the parenting techniques to use, that really wasn't the one to go to. It just made her unsympathetic, in my opinion. If it had been like an actual struggle where she started using the powers in order to get through actual genuine strife, then I would have been like, okay, I can see how she would have become obsessed. But for these menial things, it was just like, you're just weak, basically. But then the story gets very interesting, particularly in that episode, because we have this sort of symmetry where at the very end, Alicent loses her power as Vanya slits her throat with that violin string, and essentially she becomes powerless because her voice was her power. The ability to say, I heard a rumor, is rooted in that power. So that was really interesting to see the twist at the end of that episode, and I did feel bad for her when she got her throat slit. And it was so adorable as well when all the brothers came to her bedside and offered up their blood, and then I think it was like Luther who offered first, of course, and he was too much of an ape man to actually offer up his blood for her, and then Klaus offers up his blood, and Pogo's like, it's a bit too polluted. I found that to be really, really funny. And it also showed how, even though each sibling is going through their own issues and they're all very, very different, it was moments like that that really brought them together as a family and made it very convincing, and their dynamics are just so genuine. Next up is Diego, who again I think works best in combination with other characters. I think when you have him working alongside Alicent or Five, that's when he really shines, because on his own he comes across as a grouch who has a chip on his shoulder and has always wanted to take on a position of leadership, but because he's only number 2 and not number 1, he's never been able to do that, and that's interesting, but it's kind of been done before. Whereas when he's working alongside his 58-year-old little brother, it's more interesting to see their dynamics at play. He definitely reminds me of kind of a vigilante Oliver Queen type character, but he does it really well. And I think the twist with him is actually he's always felt like his voice has never been heard, both literally and also figuratively. And I think it was so touching to see how the robot mum helped him with his speech impediment as a child, and how attached he became to her and how reliant he became on her as a source of love and affection, something that they were lacking under Mr. Hargreaves' leadership. So I found that to be a really interesting angle with him. And also his romance with the detective Patch. They don't really explore exactly what happened in that relationship, but they kind of leave you to kind of infer what would have happened. Basically, his vigilante ways didn't go with her sharpshooter, kind of go by the book ways, and so they ended. But I would like to see a bit more of a backstory on that. Why not? It was a pretty convincing relationship, and it did definitely resonate when she died and he was out trying to get revenge for her. When it comes to Vanya, it's tough because unlike Allison, who had a pretty lackluster story but still has that charisma to make her relatively likable, Vanya has the most interesting story, because the twist is that she always had the powers inside of her, but they were subdued by the pills that Mr. Hargreaves gave her in order to keep her submissive and sedated, so that she wouldn't have any strong emotions that would cause basically pandemonium. But at the end of the day, the character is so dreary and she's so dire that it's really hard to kind of get behind her. And at the beginning it made sense because she was on the pills, and also because she was dealing with a lot of issues from just being isolated within her family for so long. And then she wrote that tell-all book, which really made the family hate her even more. So it was understandable how depressing she was as a character. She was never able to achieve her full potential, and with the violin acting as a motif, just symbolizing the power inside of her that was always restricted and always held back. And then when it was let out, she was able to really excel and really shine. That made sense in that case. But then afterwards, when Leonard gets her to stop taking the pills, and she has the emotions bubbling up inside of her, you don't really see a huge difference in Ellen Page's characterization of this character. Like, it's very much still quite dreary, quite drab. She's a little more emotive, but not that much. I think it would have been more effective if you had a child who was passionate from the beginning, and then when she starts taking the medicine, you see how the emotions and the enthusiasm and the light that character once had just drifts away, and then when she stops taking it, you see that light come back. I think that would have made for more of a contrast that would really resonate with the viewer, because then you're seeing this character turn into a completely new person when she's no longer sedated by the medication. But then aside from the way that the character is played, you also have the fact that she is very difficult to like just based on her actions. Like, she's so resistant towards Allison, even though one of her biggest desires is to be included in the family. When Allison tries to do that, she's very resistant. And then you have the tell-all book, which really puts her in the wrong, because she's the one that exposed the family in that way, and it did affect the rest of their lives, and she didn't seem to care about that. She just wanted a moment of attention. And I keep telling myself, like, I understand where she's coming from because of the years of isolation and exclusion from the rest of the team, but still, it just makes her more and more difficult to sympathize with, because she messed up. She keeps messing up, especially with Leonard, when Allison tries to tell her, Leonard is a bad guy, and she slits Allison's throat as a result. Like, it just feels like it's coming out of nowhere when she does that. And again, I think it's because this character has been so depressing, or so even depressed throughout the whole length of the show, that at the end, when she has this outburst of energy and emotion and passion, it seems artificial, because it's not something that we saw build up. And then you have Five, who's this 58-year-old man trapped inside a teenager's body. And he's a really interesting character because unlike his siblings, who are very emotional and very concerned with their own issues, he is much more pragmatic. He takes a look at the bigger picture, as the handler put it, and he tries to find solutions for the apocalypse, the impending apocalypse, which he was forced to live in for many, many decades in isolation. So I think he's an interesting character because he's the one that sees sense amongst the mass of nonsense that the family has to deal with. But sometimes he does come across as uncaring, especially in the first half of the season, and so it makes it quite difficult to relate to the character and sympathize with him. But I think what really does it is Dolores. So at the beginning of the season, you have him alluding to a possible romance that he had when he was experiencing the apocalypse. And then it turns out to be this mannequin from a store that happened to survive the destruction, and her name is Dolores, and he seems to be able to communicate with her. And it's really funny because it kind of humanizes him, as well as showing the impact of time travel and being completely isolated from everyone in the apocalypse. And what that can do to your mental state and your psyche. So it was really cool having that element of his character, as well as the fact that he's low-key an alcoholic, and he doesn't get disrespected in the same way as Klaus. Even though they both are suffering their addictions, he's definitely more respected in comparison to his brother. There are definitely aspects to Five's storyline that reminded me of DC's Legends of Tomorrow, especially the stuff about the Commission, with the Time Bureau being pretty similar. I love the fact that there are so many different comic book properties out there that have been popularized, that now we're going in deep and we're looking for the weirder, stranger properties that you would have never thought would be made into TV shows or films. And the Umbrella Academy is definitely that. It's definitely a candidate for something that really strays from the beaten path. They explore the darker side of having superpowers where everything isn't all fine and dandy. These powers consume the siblings. They're a part of the downfall of their lives, and even being raised to think that you are responsible for saving the world as a child, you see the impact of that pressure that Mr. Hargreaves put on them. And it's such an interesting story to explore because they're fighting with their own demons as well as fighting with each other. There's this lack of understanding between the siblings at the beginning of the show, where they haven't really connected with each other for so long. They don't really know each other that well. But then by the end, you see them coming together, and they've definitely got a fundamental understanding of who they are and what they stand for. And that's with the apocalypse approaching. So I think it's such an interesting story arc to go through, and it's something that wouldn't have been explored at all, I don't think, if it wasn't for the comic book, movie and TV show renaissance that we are experiencing right now. I think another interesting point as well is the fact that Mr. Hargreaves never really addressed them by their name. He only gave them numbers to identify them with. And so I think that lack of a name just kind of linked to that lack of self-identification and kind of led to their lack of an understanding of who they truly are as individuals and not just another number in the academy. I think the fact that the robot mum, who is programmed to be a caregiver but doesn't have natural emotions of her own, the fact that she names them and gives them that right to personhood is really telling. I think it can be compared to how Sandra Bullock's character doesn't name the two kids. She only calls them by boy and girl, but at the very end she does give them a name. I think it was done better in the show because obviously they went into so much more depths with each and every character, and we really got to understand the impact of the way that they were raised on the people that they became as adults. Finally, let's talk about the music and setting. I liked both. In terms of the music, I was really impressed with the use of music in this show. I really liked the soundtrack, especially in episode 6, which I think is my favorite episode, or if it isn't, it's definitely up there, where they play Dancing in the Moonlight. And as soon as I heard those keys, I was like, oh my god, this is the perfect song for that moment where Luther and Allison are sharing that that dream date. In terms of the setting, I really liked where the story is told. It feels kind of timeless because you can't really tell whether it's set in the modern day or if it's in this weird kind of 1970s timeline, because no one's using smartphones in this film, and in fact all of the technology seems really outdated. Like when Allison tries to learn more information about Leonard, she goes to the library and their computers are really old. But at the same time, there are some vehicles like the taxis, they're very modern, so it's kind of hard to tell what time these people exist in. And I really like the special effects in this show as well, especially when it comes to Pogo. The way that they realize that character using special effects is so impressive, especially for a TV budget, although Netflix is out rolling checks for anyone with any idea these days, like left, right and center, so TV budget doesn't really apply in this case. But it's definitely impressive, and I was just thinking, you know, if Umbrella Academy can do that on Netflix money, then why can't Aladdin do that with Disney money, huh? Just saying. And lastly, this show has Mary J. Blige acting as an assassin named Cha-Cha. I should have just started off with that, really. So finally, do I regret spending 10 hours of my life on this show? Not at all. I had a fun time with this. I think it's so cleverly written. The twists and turns come organically. Like, you can definitely see how the story builds, with each episode revealing a different layer to the complex story. And at the heart of this story is the characters, and they really are the best part of the show, where you have different combinations of the siblings, like, you know, Five and Diego, or Luther and Allison, or anyone with Klaus. I think just seeing them together interacting as siblings and as people who may not fully understand each other but really care about each other fundamentally, I think that's what took the story to a whole new level. So clearly I had a fun time with this show. I'm going to give The Umbrella Academy an 8.5 out of 10. There are a few things I would have liked to see more from the show, and I will be discussing the things that I want to see in season 2, if they get one, in another video coming up real soon. So if you want to see what my thoughts are on what should happen in season 2, please feel free to subscribe so you can check out that video as soon as it comes out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.